So it started years ago when I was a young lad. I always had a fascination with human behavior, why people do what they do. We wanted to challenge ourselves. We had a heart for storytelling. This is cool. We should continue on this path and see where it takes us. It felt very cathartic, I'm not going to lie. It was like going down memory lane. In a way, it was almost therapeutic. There were times where it was emotionally taxing. It was definitely shaky times for sure. There was a lot of emotion that came out. It was painful to relive some of that stuff. People, they do want to share their challenges. They do want to share their pain points. But sometimes it's just hard. You have to really earn their trust. It all comes down to being able to listen. These are real stories. This is real pain. And pain is more universal than happiness. But storytelling is all about reaching an audience and being able to connect with them. You can control the narrative. You almost control the masses.
How do you become a good storyteller? What are the best ways or practices to create a compelling story?
Stories can really shape generations. What makes a great story just...
Back to another episode. Today's guest is an award-winning filmmaker, an actor, a writer, an entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of Platinum Peak Productions and the co-host of the Scaling Creator podcast. Without further ado, let's welcome Eriksen Dickens. How's it going, Eriksen?
It's going great. Man. Thank you for having me on here, and thanks for gassing me up there during that introduction. You're making me sound a lot more than what I am, but no, hey, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thanks for being here, man. I've been so excited to have this conversation with you. So many different topics and interesting things to talk about. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of our conversation, tell me a little bit about your background and what got you into video production and filmmaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So it started years ago when I was a young lad with my younger brother. We used to make like home movies as a kid. We get costumes, write little scripts, and we just go all out. And it was so much fun. But sports kind of took priority. We were both athletes. So our love for filmmaking and movie making, it kind of took a backseat to that. And then eventually we got to college and we ended up at the same university, and we were collegiate athletes, but unfortunately injuries sidelined us. So our sports careers were over. And we were like, okay, what do we do with our lives now? It was a big part of our identity that was gone because we had been so used to being athletes forever. So we had some time on our hands, and, that went on for a few months. And finally, my brother, he was like, what if we got back into filmmaking? What if we started kind of rekindling that old passion of ours? And I said, okay, great, let's do it. Why not? So we put some money together. We got a little bit of equipment, and one thing led to another, man. We just started going out and shooting what we could, building a little bit of a portfolio, learning, because we were self-taught, right? We didn't go to film school. And so one thing led to another, and we just both realized that, wow, we not only have a little bit of a talent here, but we have a passion for this. And so it just grew, it snowballed.
Yeah, I've seen some of their videos, and you focus very much into the documentaries, especially the legacy documentaries, which is kind of surprising given your upbringing, because you used to, goof around and play around with your brother, just making, either sketches or small films and movies. But how do you come up with the idea of diving into the legacy documentaries area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us, we wanted to challenge ourselves. We had a heart for storytelling more so. It's one thing to just go shoot a montage or something like that, but we wanted to tell stories that mattered. And we thought the best thing we can do at the time was challenge ourselves by trying to put together a legit documentary where we have to pull a bunch of people together, put a whole storyline, a coherent storyline together. So we started with a documentary that we did about my late father. We figured, okay, let's do something that honors him. Be the first attempt at a documentary, and it's something that's near and dear to our hearts. And so we spent about a year and a half or so interviewing a bunch of people, going to a bunch of different locations, all in hopes of like making something that honored our dad. And the end result was like a 80-minute documentary. We premiered it in our local town, our hometown. About 300 people came, and we just felt really good about it. It not only brought a bunch of people together, but we looked at it and said, "This is cool. We should continue on this path and see where it takes us." And because it's one thing to tell a story about somebody who's close to you, but we were like, what if we replicated this process and continued to do it for other people, other individuals, other families with noteworthy stories? And that was kind of the the birth of the legacy documentary concept.
Yeah, that is very cool and very interesting. I actually watched that one, the one that you wrote and directed for your dad, his
Oh, okay.
legacy,
Hmm.
the rise, ride, and last stand for of the
Yeah.
Oakdale Colts. I really enjoyed the documentary. I really, I wanted to learn more about you, about the whole your upbringing, and it was very very cool to see what your dad Mark was able to build with his pals and that culture, that sense of either brotherhood or closeness, between. But how did it feel to create his project and relive all those memories?
Yeah, that's a good question. I appreciate you taking the time to watch it too. I mean, yeah, that took a lot of work. It felt very cathartic. I'm not going to lie. It was like going down memory lane. We were interviewing a bunch of my old teammates that my dad had coached, all my old coaches, family members. And so it just, in a way, it was almost therapeutic. I want to say I felt like I had to tell this story to almost, in a sense, give myself a little bit of closure. The loss of a parent is something that always sticks with you. And I think that doing that was therapeutic in a way for both my brother and I. We learned more about my dad throughout the process, interviewing family members, my uncles. And like I said, it brought a lot of people together. And I think it was a very shared experience for everybody. And just watching everybody almost relive the whole journey, it was powerful, man. It was really a powerful thing, and we walked away from that whole experience feeling like we obtained some of that closure for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that I appreciated the most about the documentary, seeing what happened after your dad passed away, that it remained, and you guys even, he was supposed to be your high school coach, and obviously he couldn't, but you guys end up winning. And even though you only had like 3 or 4 remaining of the OG players, you still went all the way in, and that speaks volume of the culture created at the beginning, which is in, anybody who wants to do anything in life, whether it's sports, business, anything, creating, being able to create that, something special like that, it is extremely hard. Did you come? Did you learn some lessons when you were making this film of things that you could apply into your life, into your businesses, into your companies as well?
Yeah, for sure. We learned a lot about just the step by steps when it came to production, what it actually takes. I mean, we were young at the time; we were amateurs, so obviously the production value of that first film was quite lackluster. So we learned a lot about that. We learned a lot about how to piece together a narrative that's coherent. We learned a lot about choosing subjects that will help drive the narrative forward and what it takes to actually do that. Um, and we learn more about ourselves, I think, throughout the process. How to approach a project without being so emotionally invested in it to where it takes a toll on you. That was a personal project, obviously, and so obviously there were times where it was emotionally taxing, right? And I'm an empathetic person as it is, so I knew that if we were going to be doing this for other clients, other families with heart wrenching stories in some cases, that you have to learn a sense of boundaries in a sense because you don't want to get so wrapped up in a story to where you become hindered and is taking a toll on yourself. So those were some of the things we learned. I'm sure there's more, but they're subconscious at this point.
Yeah, I cannot imagine how hard that would have been, especially for me, if I had to go through, relive those moments. I can see how they can help you move on. It can help you just have closure. But I guess the courage and the resilience of making it and re-listening to the stories, whether when you're filming or editing, it's tough because your brain takes you back in time, and you know that those whatever 18 months were absolutely miserable, were tough, and you guys being so young, it that can scar you for life, to some degree. Which leads me to a question. You and your brother Soren went through some heavy stuff, obviously, at a very young age. I think that you were like 14 when your dad passed away, and then a year or so later, your mom Mila got diagnosed with breast cancer. So, how do you guys, well, I guess you can't speak for your brother, but how do you do to not lose optimism, on how to keep moving forward, how to just not be angry at life, or at God or the universe for losing a parent, which is extremely hard, and then maybe being close to lose another one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It was definitely shaky times for sure. Like when you lose a parent, you definitely feel like life becomes a lot more unpredictable for you. You have a hard time seeing like, okay, what's the purpose? What's the reason behind this? So there was a lot of just doubt in a lot of things, and it caused a lot of anger and frustration. And I'm not somebody who believes that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I believe that it depends on what you do with those emotions, right? And luckily for me and my brother, we, instead of going down a path that could have led us to a very dark place, we channeled all those emotions and we used them as fuel to propel us forward. We put those towards something good. I think a lot of creators, regardless of what medium, they have some dark places, right? They have some demons per se, whether they're actors, filmmakers, writers, and I think in a lot of ways they're able to take those demons, those scars, and put them into their work in a way that creates something beautiful from it. And so, my brother and I, we kind of took that pain and we figured, okay, let's put it towards something that could lead to something good, and we can make a less than crappy situation into something beautiful and worthwhile. And it also allowed us the ability to, I think, relate to other people on a more deeper level in terms of like what they're going through. And if you're putting a story together with people, you need to be able to understand them and truly listen to them and feel their pain in a way. And because we came from the trauma that we experienced, we were equipped with that ability. So I think that helped in a way. But yeah, man, to answer your question, those were some hard years, and I empathize with a lot of people who've experienced trauma at a young age, regardless of what that trauma was, because it can dictate the course of your life. And I've had some people in my life, some friends that have experienced similar situations as kids, and their paths didn't exactly wind up where they could have been because of that. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel, and I don't know if you guys see it this way, but you and your brother, you guys should give yourself more credit, because being able to overcome that, those whatever 3 4 years of pure pain, agony, and uncertainty, and all of these things, and being able to still create something beautiful out of it without falling into the dark places, that takes a lot, and not everyone can actually do that. So it is very inspiring that you guys were able to do that, and as you said, not many people can do that. But do you think that I guess the culture, the camaraderie, the brotherhood that your dad and his pals built with the Oakdale Colts sort of help you stay on course after getting back-to-back blows, from life?
Most definitely. That's a great point you brought up. Oftentimes, I feel like it's not so much the actual events or the trauma that can really put you on the trajectory, but it's more so the response to that, right? Like it's the support system afterwards. That's where I feel like that can really dictate where your life leads. And because we had that camaraderie, I grew up in a small town, Oakdale, have a lot of really, really close lifelong friends. I credit that to my dad because my dad built that system within us at a young age. And so when he did pass and then my mom got sick afterwards, we did have such a strong, supportive community around us. And I think that's why my brother and I got lucky because we did have that. And some people, unfortunately, they don't have that support system afterwards. And that's oftentimes where they slip through the cracks. And so, it was a blessing that my dad, before he passed, like he set that up for us indirectly without knowing that he wouldn't be here for the long term. In a way, he was already setting that up for us so that we would have the support around us when he did pass. And I'm very thankful and I feel very blessed because of that. So that's a great point you brought up for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking about. It's like, man, yeah, as I said before, you guys deserve a lot of credit for coming out in and start creating awesome things. But also, so I saw that the closeness, how tight that group was. Like, okay, this is probably very very helpful because I never had that in my life. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I still have both of my parents alive, but yeah, I put myself in your shoes, or you. Well, I guess your brother never really played baseball, right? He was more like a swimmer.
He was a hardcore swimmer, a great swimmer. He dabbled in baseball a little bit when he was younger. He was like our bat boy. He played a little bit, but no, his main focus was swimming. And he did the same thing. Like he had some great coaches in his life that helped him post my father's death, and he just went headfirst into the pool. And he really used swimming as his I don't want to say coping mechanism, but it's really what helped him get through that whole thing. I mean, he was very determined to become the best swimmer that he could be. And there's a lot of parallels between being an athlete and being a creator in a way. You know, you're both working towards a goal. You're in a team environment. You have to come together towards a common goal. And I think being athletes as well, what my dad set up for me personally, and then my brother as well with swimming, was that it almost equipped us with the tools necessary to quote unquote make it in the game that we're in now today. You know.
Yeah, that's an excellent point you make, because I feel that those who are the best, or either the best entrepreneurs or those who have the highest chances to succeed, are those who um, were raised or either grew up in a very structured environment where consistency, especially if you're an athlete, you need to just put the work, whether you like it or not, whether you enjoy it or whether you want to do it or not. You have to go to practice, you have to go to the games, and that builds that consistency that almost comes second nature when you and then you can apply those in any other areas of your life.
Yeah, it's like muscle memory, right? If you want to be good at anything, you have to build repetition. Habitual action creates muscle memory, and that's how you get into habits. Without that consistent action, how do you expect to perform, right? It's like lifting weights if you're an athlete. It's the same thing of if you want to be good at filmmaking, at storytelling, you have to actually act, you have to try, you have to polish your skills, cultivate your abilities, or else how do you expect to really grow, right? So yeah, 100%. I think it's yeah, super important.
Yeah, that is very 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 cool. And jumping a bit back to the documentaries and the legacy documentaries, you said that obviously what you went through, or you and your brother, because you guys are business partners, went through, it made you more empathetic. And I was talking to a friend of mine a few days ago that those who have gone through pains or traumas are the best equipped to have empathy for other people and help other people process either grief or pain or any other misfortunes that lives have for them. What have you seen or learned from these clients of yours that want to create this legacy or this documentary, this form of art, and how have you helped them navigate through moments of pain when they're reliving those tough times in their lives or the loved ones' lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I can give you an example. Just yesterday, I was on a call with a client. We're doing a documentary on her family, and her father was a great man. He started this amazing foundation in Texas, and we were doing a preliminary interview, me and this man's daughter, and we were going down memory lane, asking her a bunch of questions about her dad, and he ended up passing because of Alzheimer's. And we there was a lot of emotion that came up. It was painful to relive some of that stuff. So going forward, like with documentaries, in terms of legacy documentaries with clients, it took us some trial and error. Like, how do we navigate being delicate with people's stories? Because these are real stories. This is real pain, and we're being tasked with telling that story and treating it with the utmost respect. And I think, for me personally, I got my master's degree in clinical psychology, and I had to do a year doing a practicum in order to graduate, which was where I basically served as a therapist. I had to get a certain amount of hours working as a therapist with people. And that really helped me. It really equipped me with the ability to just sit with people and hold the space with them, adopt a very non-judgmental, open-minded attitude towards them. You have to really earn their trust, or you're not going to be able to get those. You're not going to be able to get the full story from them. They're not going to open up to you. And therefore you're not going to get as much of a powerful output, right? You're only going to get the surface. So you really have to take the time to earn their trust and then get to a point where they're comfortable being vulnerable with you. And I think at the beginning, we didn't think too much about that, right? We'll get some questions, we'll just go in there and interview subject, and we'll just start asking. Um, but that's not going to really reap a very, I don't know, emotionally compelling output, right? You really got to put the work in beforehand and earn their trust. And um, only by then will you be able to really dig in there and get those juicy tidbits. Because people, what I've learned as well is that people, they do want to share their challenges, they do want to share their pain points, but sometimes it's just hard, right? It's hard to kind of break down those walls. And so once you get there with somebody, it's almost a cathartic experience for them as well when they're able to share and get those emotions out. And in a way, it helps preserve their loved one's memory if they've passed on, by just sharing, by just keeping it out in the open about them in a way that honors them, and it keeps them alive. Um, so I know that was long winded, but to answer your question, yeah, yeah.
No, see, when you're saying that, and especially that you cannot go with a set of questions, and I mean, you might have a set of questions in your head, things that you want to know more about this person or the whole whatever loved one, but it takes time to build that trust. It takes time for the person to open up. Now, granted, there are some people that will just have that emotional dump on you, and you're like, "Okay, perfect, I have all the answers." Some people need that release. They need somebody that is willing to listen to them, and they can dump all of their whatever fears, traumas, insecurities, uh, emotions. But more times than not, it's the opposite. It's people who are very distant and say, "I understand what you're trying to do. I understand that we hire you to do this, but it's just hard to open up." How do you? Let me see how I phrase this question. How do you do when that person takes when the person needs an extra time, when any and you are rolling and you're building the story in your head? So, okay, this is how the story is going to build, because at the end of the day you are a storyteller. But how do you do with those people who they need a little bit more time to warm up, they need a little bit more time to start being more vulnerable and opening themselves up?
Yeah. Um, so really, it comes down to giving ample time before the actual interview, like until we sit down, lights, camera, action. We really start. The right word is like grooming them in a way, right? During pre-production, we have a lot of preliminary interviews with them. So we start warming up and we start, you got to let them know that we're not here to trip you up. We're not here to hurt you, right? We're on the same page as you. It's my job to hold your hand and help you through this. And so that means basically like months in advance. Sometimes you can have 3, 4, 5 preliminary interviews over Zoom or in person, whatever it is, and you just warm them up and you get a gauge for what their pain points are. And you don't want to push, right? You don't just go jump right into, tell me about how your son died. I want to know all about that, A to Z. You got to poke at it a little bit. You got to gauge their reactions, and that's just about being mindful and understanding people. And that took some trial and error, but everyone's different, like you said. So it really just comes down to being observant too, like gauging their physical reactions, how they respond to something. You can kind of gauge if this is something that might get them somewhere emotionally, and if it is, and you can tell that this is something that where they don't want to go, maybe we sideline that and we come back to it a little bit later, and then we poke just a little bit harder. And maybe after they were warmed up a little bit with the first poke, when you poke again a little bit, then it's going to come out a little bit more. It's just treating the situation delicately.
No, it makes total sense, and what you said is true. By the way, you cannot just go full force and ask all these questions, and you need to be mindful and you need to be thoughtful. Not everyone can do that. People have this. Most people have this weird thing of, well, but you want to tell the story, just tell me, right? It's like, what are we doing? It's like, you need to be gentle with people, and and again, I think that when you are a great listener, you can navigate those waters, better. But I gotta ask, right? You had a bachelor's in philosophy, and you were on your way of building your acting and filmmaker career, right? You had a couple of documentaries. What made you pursue that master's degree in clinical psychology?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Um, so I always had a fascination with human behavior and just why people do what they do, how their background shaped them. And when I did get my master's, my brother and I, we were a few years into the filmmaking thing. And I really just thought that if I got my master's in clinical psychology, it's going to make me a more powerful storyteller, right? It's going to give me the tools necessary to be able to understand people better, engage human emotion, be able to understand how their trials and tribulations shape them. So I decided to get my master's. I went on the marriage family therapist route, Pepperdine University out here in California. It's a 3 year process, and I I really was able to apply a lot of the stuff that I learned into filmmaking and storytelling in general. Because storytelling is all about reaching an audience and being able to connect with them. And if you understand psychology, generally speaking, you have a little bit of a leg up on doing that. It just on a basic level, just interviewing people, right? Sitting down one on one with somebody, that is the exact replication of essentially like what a therapist might do, right? And being able to hold the space with them and hold their pain, walk through it with them. And so I just found that it was super beneficial. And I just went with it. And 3 years later, I got my degree. And yeah, I rely a lot on the tools like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a psychological framework, and I help that kind of helps me with like a backbone for the documentaries. Understanding someone's physiological needs, their self-esteem needs, and how they became self-actualized. It's like a pyramid, and that's helped me understand the person on a more robust, intricate level. So, yeah, great question.
That's awesome. That's awesome because I've always been fascinated as well with human behavior. I guess in part because I could never fit in a group, so I would always observe what other people are doing. Always asking myself the why people say what they say, why they behave the way they behave. But I would have never gone as far as uh, uh, taking just either a master's degree or just studies psychology. I read a lot of nonfiction books. I love them, but the fact that you went all in because you had like a vision of, oh, this is going to help me to tell better stories. This is going to help me to understand people better is absolutely awesome, man. But since we're talking about storytelling, right? Again, always been fascinated by it as well. I think people have the propensity to believe whoever tells the best story. I mean, we as a humans, we have the propensity of being persuaded by a good story. And I feel that the best stories always wins, not necessarily the right answer, right? So the person who tells the story you want to hear will always get the attention. Having said that, how do you become a good storyteller? What are the best ways or practices to create a compelling story?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so we broke that down. I mean, we took a lot of time trying to figure out like a given formula for our stories. And we really learned that we broke it down into 7 pillars, right? So it's like we're talking about a subject's life. We need to know the history, right? Like what shaped them at a young age to the trajectory. Because oftentimes you can trace back where they are now to instances in their childhood that put them on a certain trajectory. So we talk about the history, then we talk about their process. What's their life philosophy like? Then we talk about their passion, like right, their drive, like why do they get up every morning? What's the motivation behind what they do, right? So the passion. And we talk about their obstacles. So that's really important to me. I think every story needs a very healthy dose of conflict. You can't really have a story unless there's some type of conflict that needs to be overcome. So that really helps us understand the person more, how they embrace a challenge, what were the challenges that shaped them, um, and then from there we talk about their achievements, right? Their successes. We need to understand what what they've accomplished, right? Because everyone loves a success story, but most of the time people love a success story when it's more of a rags to riches story, or it's more of a rocky story, right? When somebody comes from nothing, or they come from a place of great despair, and they're able to propel themselves forward to reach those achievements. So that's super important to tie those together. And then from there, we talk about the impact, right? What's the impact that they've had on society, on the people around them, their friends, their family, whatever it might be. Um, there's got to be some type of cause and effect. There has to be an impact. So we dive deep into that as well. And then from there, we talk about like the future, right? If they're still with us, the subject's still here. We want to talk about what their future goals are. What do they still hope to accomplish? Because oftentimes people who are very successful, or they've accomplished a lot, or they've done a lot, they don't want to just stop. They want to keep going. They still have aspirations. They still have goals. But that's what's worked for us in terms of storytelling. But I think honestly, what makes a great story just overall is just like, I think the ability to convey a message in a way that's going to relate to your audience, and knowing what your audience is, but putting your heart into it. Like, people can normally sniff that out. If it's a story just to, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Being true to yourself more, as opposed to just telling a story for the sake of it. Like telling a story that actually means something to you, and you're doing this as a way to be true to yourself, right? And true to what you really want to do. I think that always makes for a more interesting story, at least for me personally, you know?
Yeah, I guess I understand your point. People want to know that you care, right? You know, more times than not, or almost any in every scenario, people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And knowing that, okay, this guy gets it. He cares about the product. He cares about the story. He cares about all of this, and and whether it's just telling your story or somebody else's story, you can reflect that into the final product, right? And nobody's going to work harder, nobody's going to put more effort into the small detail as somebody who really cares about telling a story.
Yeah. Mhm. You have to live it. I mean, if you want to tell a compelling story, uh, you can't just kind of like, oh, I'll do a little bit here, a little bit there. At least that's for me personally. You really have to dive in and commit to it. If you're not committed to a story, then that's going to show in the final output. I know for me, when I'm doing creating stories, I try to just be very observant of everything around me and how that relates to the story that I'm trying to tell. And that can be very simple, everyday things, but it's always got to be somewhere in the back of your mind, right? Like, okay, the more you can kind of flesh it out in your head, you don't have to always figure it out, like what's A to B to C. But if you want to tell a compelling story, it needs to be top of mind pretty often, right? You got to kind of live and breathe it, and then it just kind of comes naturally in a way.
Do you think that a compelling or good story, or do you think that a story can be good and compelling without an obstacle, or with obstacles but without success? Can that
Yeah,
be created in a sense?
sure. Sure, because I think oftentimes, man, like sometimes it's like there's a lot of obstacles, but there's not a lot of success, and that's real to real life. So that can be compelling in itself. I think there was one famous director, David Fincher. I think he said something like he likes characters that don't change, like because that's more real. People sometimes don't change throughout life, and I guess it just depends on who's watching it, and it can be subjective. But for me personally, it's like there can be some really compelling stories out there. I've seen some very compelling movies that get their message across by that very fact that sometimes there are no successes, but it's the failure in the try that really can make a compelling narrative, right? Like the person might have tried, or the person tried really hard to get to A to B to C, but they failed, but maybe they failed valiantly, or maybe the whole message is tied up in the fact that there is no positive outcome, and that can be extremely depressing, but it can also be extremely compelling too. What do you think? Yeah, that's an interesting one.
So when you were talking about the obstacles but not successes, right? I thought about, um, see, it's very subjective, because what is success? When you ask anybody the definition of success, you have a wild range of answers. But overcoming an obstacle by itself is a success
Yeah,
to some degree. That person who used to weigh whatever 250 pounds and now he weighs like 220 is still overweight, but at least he's not gaining more, he's actually losing. Those people who used to have like a alcohol addiction or drug abuse addiction, and they're sober now, they might not be success in life how we define success, like, oh, being wealthy or building these amazing things. but they could be much worse, and they overcame a massive obstacle.
That's a success. Yeah,
So I think, and I see, I think that every good story needs to have obstacles because people can relate more with obstacles than with success.
for sure. For sure.
I it feels like pain moves us more than joy or happiness will, right? The the thing to avoid the pain, or to finding and coping mechanisms to do that. And when we see others that were able to do it, so well, there's some hope for me. I might not be extremely successful, I might not be wealthy, but I can overcome this particular thing that is affecting my life.
Right. Pain is more universal than happiness, or pain is more universal than success, right? We all feel pain to some extent. And so I think if you can see that in a story, you can relate to it. And just by seeing or feeling somebody else's pain, it makes people feel a little less alone in a lot of circumstances, right? If they can feel like somebody else is experiencing similar thoughts or feelings or whatever, that alone can help, like you said, give them hope that there is a brighter future, even if they don't like reach that point of subjective success. Just knowing that you're not alone in what you might feel, that alone can create a very compelling feeling inside somebody. So I agree with you.
When you are creating these documentaries, right? How do you keep a balance between not focus too much? Because it's very easy to focus so much on the obstacles, because, like, as you said, they're very compelling. People can relate. People can identify with those. But because even in your documentary about your late fan, that I only saw a small piece of that true obstacle of, when he was sick. And most of the documentary was very happy, was very inspiring, how everyone was so grateful for the before and after. um, but you were able to only put a you sprinkle here and there without damaging the whole image, without making it seem that it wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal, but you created that balance where it wasn't a depressing documentary by itself.
Right. Yeah. That's a good question. You have to be tactical with it, because nobody, I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there, but nobody really wants to watch something that's just one long, depressing obstacle, right? That's not going to give anyone any hope. And after a while, it's just going to sound like, okay, this is just hard to watch or hard to read, right? So you just have to be tactical, right? What we do is, like, when we present a challenge or an obstacle, we try to always juxtapose the obstacle with, okay, how'd they get through it, or at least how they try to get through it, and offer some hope. And then we kind of split that up depending on how many challenges and obstacles we want to explore. Um, because, like I said, nobody wants to just watch something that's just pure, just depressing, right? So it's just really understanding the story and how we can communicate it in a way that gives the audience hope and allows the subject story to uh, reflect their reflect their success, right? And it depends on the client, right? When we're working with different people, it depends on what their story actually is, but that can be hard to balance. You're right, especially if somebody has lived a very hard life. It can be hard to just not just focus on the obstacles and what they went through. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, when you were saying when you were talking about giving people hope, right? It That phrase took me. I just watched recently the documentary about Sylvester Stallone, Slide, on
Yeah, yeah,
Netflix.
yeah.
Yeah. So he was saying that when he was doing when they were filming Rambo, at the end of the movie, he was supposed to die, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then he said, "I'm not going to do that," and it almost got to a breach of contract. Say, we have so many veterans committing suicide. I want to give them hope, right? If I die, then they feel that they have no hope in life, that they're damaged goods and their life is supposed to end like right now. So that opened my eyes. And especially, again, it's just a movie. It wasn't a documentary, it wasn't anything. But even a fiction movie, you want to put hope into people's minds. And because at the end of the day, if you don't have hope, then what's the point of living, to some degree?
Totally, man. And I feel like stories are so powerful in regards to how, like, if you can control the narrative, you can almost control the masses, right? That's why I don't watch a whole lot of news. I like to stay informed, but I avoid a lot of the news, especially in America, because it's just so doom and gloom. 90% of the stuff they report, they have the narrative that there's no hope, that it's bad here, it's bad there, it's horrible here, and in turn, that creates hysteria in the people, that creates panic, that creates the feeling of despair. So I'm a big believer in, like, just the reality of how stories can really shape generations. Like you said, yeah, Rambo, it's just a movie, but yeah, totally. Like it can definitely dictate how somebody feels and how somebody responds to something. I mean, us as storytellers, especially in the medium of media, we have a big responsibility in a way. And I feel like, it's like, yeah, you want to tell stories that are true and realistic, and oftentimes true and realistic stories don't always have happy endings. But when it's in the form of art, I personally think that you have a responsibility to at least try to give people hope. Or else, like you said, what's the point of, like, carrying on? And then you get into the territory of nihilism and the feeling of nothing matters. And then that doesn't always lead down a very good path. And I just feel like, yeah, if you can create stories that will give people, a glimmer of hope, and it helps to get them through the day, then you know what, you're contributing to society in a beneficial way.
You're so right. You're so right about the news. I'm just like you. I tried. My only news comes from headlines on Twitter. I guess X now. But yeah, I don't. I stopped watching whether Bloomberg, CNN, or any of those, because what I felt is like bad news. Have more audience. You click. People are more intended to click on a bad news. It's kind of like a clickbait thing, or because he has like stronger emotions, that fear, that despair, than, oh, you know what, let's run a wholesome story about how this dog whatever saved this kid. Okay, fine, that would only last for 5-10 minutes of your day. But if it's a negative news, it's it's probably going to extend. And that's why there's this famous YouTuber, I don't remember his name, that's on me. He said that he A/B tested putting a positive facial expression and a negative one, and the negative one always had way, way, way more views. It's almost like people are inclined to the negative thing. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, people are drawn to conflict. People are drawn to conflict. That's just the reality. But if you absorb too much of it, what is that doing to your brain, to your psyche, to your outlook on life? If you stare into the abyss for too long, the abyss is going to start staring back into you, and that can lead you into some places that you might not want to be in life. So, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I feel it's total irresponsible from traditional media, but it is what it is. I mean, the only thing that people can do is just ignore and live their lives without trying to freak out about Ukraine or Israel or this or the elections or that. It's like, look, more times than not, you're not going to be affected by any of this anyway. So worrying about things is just is taking um, years of your life of where you can you can use them to enjoy life, and to see more like a positive, positive outlook, or yeah, no, enjoy the small moments. But if you're so drawn into the negative side, then what's next, right?
Yeah, and I'm a big believer, and you can only control what you can control, right? And oftentimes we can only control what's in our life right in front of us. And sure, it's like you can care about things that you can't control, and that's not a bad thing. And it's good to be empathetic. But if you spend so much of your mental energy on things that you can't, it's going to drive you crazy. It's going to literally drive you crazy. You're not going to be able to live your life to the fullest. You're not going to have a fulfilled life because your mind is always going here and there and the things that you can't control. So that's always been big for me as well, and it was hard for me to kind of get to that point because I am an empathetic person, and I like understanding how one action is affecting somebody else and how that's relative to my life and stuff. But at a certain point, if you want to reach your goals and get to where you want to be, you got to learn to almost tune that stuff out in a way, right? That's just the reality of it.
I mean, you gotta be optimistic. You have to. It's the only way that you can actually succeed in life. Because if you're pessimistic, yeah, you might be right 99% of the time of being pessimistic, but then you're never gonna be right that time that is gonna take you from point A to point B to more. to have more fulfillment in your life or whatnot. So yeah, as you said, you can only control certain things is what you do and how you react to it. And yeah, absolutely. So it feels like just kind of coming back to a point of storytelling and not being able and not be drawn to be all negative. It feels like you need to find like a perfect balance between relatability and hope, just like enough that people can relate that okay, this is not clearly if you tell the story of, I don't know, uh this somebody with massive talent, well, even though that person could come from struggles, yeah, but how many people have that nature, the natural talent by itself? You want people, you want stories that, oh, I could be that person, or that could have been me, and that sort of things.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. It can't be understated. Like I was saying earlier, just how powerful stories can be in terms of getting people mobile, getting people to see themselves more. I think stories are like a mirror in a lot of ways. The more you can self-reflect by watching other people's stories, the more you'll learn about yourself. And if you don't know what you want or what you need, if you don't understand yourself, then it's going to be hard to really get the ball rolling. But once you can kind of reflect and understand yourself by using stories as your mirror, then the chances of you being able to pinpoint what you want and how to get there are going to increase. So, 100%.
Has there been any story from one of your clients that has been tough for you from an emotional level, when you apply empathy to other people's uh, traumas or past experiences? It could be hard. Is there, and probably for you it's easier because you went through some tough things in the past. But has there been a story where you felt like shit? I mean, this one is heavy.
Yes, definitely. We did this 2 hour documentary on a gentleman's life. He migrated here from Lebanon in the 1970s. He came from nothing, and he lost his mom to cancer at a young age. He was like a teenager, and so that paralleled my own story. And so diving into that, it brought up my own past as well. And then he came to America, got married, had 5 kids, and then his wife ended up passing away from early onset dementia. And so his kids lost a parent, he lost his wife. And so that again kind of brought me back to my own stuff as well. And so living with this family for almost 2 years and diving into their story and how all those things affected them, because you're in the story every day, right? And it took a toll on me. I'm not going to lie. I mean, there were some times where I was tearing up. I was crying on the weekly almost, like just because it was a lot, and it took a toll on me. And that's when I just started to realize more and more, and that story helped me, is that I need to be able to, I guess, create boundaries in a sense for myself. Like, you have to care, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes to an extent, but you can't let it get to a point where you're becoming you're just completely taxed by it. Because at the end of the day, it is a job, right? It's a job that I'm very passionate about. I'm very grateful for, but it can't get to a point where it's depleting you emotionally all the time. And so that's something that I've been working on with myself, some self-reflecting, and learning myself. But yeah, to answer your question, that one took a big toll on me, because it was just a great story, a lot of accomplishments, a huge success story. But man, was there a lot of pain along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, and just putting myself in your shoes, like you're almost reliving your story like twice, right?
Mhm.
But they're living with a family that is going through that pain. It must be tough. It's almost like you need to be able to compartmentalize and just kind of like separate, Eriksen the person and
Yeah,
the filmmaker. But that line
it's
gets
hard.
very blurry, and I don't know. I don't have the mental capacity at this point to even be able to have those two different things. So I can only imagine it's super tough.
I'm still not 100% there either, man. It's hard. And I think in a way it's almost you don't want to be 100% there because there needs to be a part of you that is empathetic to that point where you can fully relive it without sacrificing your own mental emotional well-being. But I don't want to get all the way 100% there. I want to be like 95% of the way there. That way I still have that 5% where I can really get in there and then feel those emotions. That way I can articulate them in a way, craft them in a way in the story that's going to be, as if I'm fully there. But yeah, it's not easy, man. And I think that's why a lot of artists, regardless of their medium, they can get lost in their work sometimes because they're so committed and they're so dedicated and they put so much of themselves into it. Um, and sometimes that can reap negative repercussions on their overall health.
Yeah, totally. And I guess you can never do it 100%. If not, you would be like a sociopath or something, being able to just completely
Right.
break those two characters. And shout out to even the therapists out there, because I don't even know how they do it. Listening to stories every single week
Dude,
and
it's
being able to, well, you experienced that firsthand to some extent.
hmm Oh, I did, yeah, for sure. And that was because I wasn't ever really strongly, I wasn't really ever considering, okay, maybe I will actually get my actual marriage family therapist license. I teetered on that. But during that year where I did my practicum, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. It was very intrinsically rewarding. But at the end of it, I realized that, you know what, I cannot do this for a living for sure. Like, I couldn't shoulder every day, client after client after client. Um, Sharing their pain and being there, and it takes a very special person to be able to be a therapist, day in and day out, man. And I went a different way with it, and I applied a lot of what I learned into what I do now. But shout out to therapists out there who take on that responsibility, because that is a lot. That is a lot. And dealing with transference every day is a big emotional commitment.
Totally, totally. So, Erickson, I've been enjoying our conversation quite a lot. It's been inspiring. I've been very, I don't know, I've learned a lot from you and how your mind works and how you go and do your business. But as a closing question, right? And I think that this will perfectly fit into this whole thing. What is a personal legacy that you want to leave either for yourself or for your future children, if you have any at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to always say that I want to be remembered as like my story was telling yours. I want to be remembered as somebody who truly cared and took the time to tell the stories that mattered. Because, like I said, I do feel like stories are such a powerful way to communicate to the masses. And so I want to be remembered as somebody who truly listened, and did my best to help people in the way that I'm capable of doing. And I think the way that I'm best capable, the way that I'm best fitted for that, is to tell stories that matter, that do help people, that do inspire people to the best of my abilities. So yeah, that's how I want to be kind of remembered. That's my personal legacy. Um, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, love it, man. And yeah, I totally agree with you. And one thing that I've learned in my early journey, just interviewing people, is that I can literally learn from anybody,
Hmm.
whether you're a homeless person or ultra rich. There's something in the stories that you can apply to yourself, and you can learn. And you sharing people's stories, regardless whether they are super successful, super inspiring, or not so much, that is powerful. And I think people are craving that. People are craving like real stories, things that they can identify with.
Hmm. Hmm. I agree. And I think it just all comes down to being able to listen, right? Being able to listen to maybe the homeless man, maybe the rich man, whoever it might be, because you never know where you might get those tidbits of wisdom that stick with you for the rest of your life. And that's something that I've been very blessed with, working with clients from a wide range of industries, from a wide range of backgrounds, is I've been able to learn a lot and then apply some of the stuff that I've learned to my own life that has made me a better, more fulfilled human being.
Yeah, totally. And being a great listener is something that we're lacking in today's
For sure.
society for sure. So whenever you encounter somebody who is a great listener, they you create that bond with that person to some extent.
100%. Yeah. A lot of people, they don't really listen. They're just waiting for their next response. Like they're thinking about how they're going to respond without truly absorbing what the other person is saying. And that's a huge issue in society today. And I think I can go down the rabbit hole as to why I think that is. I can blame TikTok and all of the social media stuff. That's all but yeah, that's the reality. It's nice when people actually take the time and they make some space in their brains to actually absorb what the other person is saying. That's only going to strengthen relationships and form genuine connections. I think that's very important in life in general.
No, absolutely. And one a few years ago, I heard this quote that said, let me see, don't listen to respond, listen to understand.
Yeah,
And
facts.
and every now and then I struggle with that because my mind is not that I'm thinking about response. My mind goes to a million places, so it's hard for me to focus. I'm trying to get better at it. But yes, it's just like, don't think about yourself. Think about the other person who's telling the story, and truly, truly listen and understand their point of view.
Yeah, it's always a work in progress for everybody. It's natural, and I feel like the fact that you recognize it, I recognize it about myself sometimes. That's the first step. It's like if you don't recognize it, then the chances of you actually correcting the course of that not going to happen. I think a lot of people don't have the self awareness to even recognize it. So that's the first step to that for sure.
To- totally. And yeah, TikTok is ruining society for sure. Uh, you know, we need to we need to be honest about it. And yeah, I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Erickson, where can people find you if they either want to work with you or watch your content or anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. They can find us if you want to learn more about the legacy documentaries that we do. You can find us at dickensbrothers.com. And then if you want to learn a little bit more about our video agency, all the other types of videos we do for other clients, you can find us at platinumpeak.com. Peak is with two E's. If you want to follow along on our socials, you can find me at my personal. It's at Eriksen W. Dickens. And then our agency as well, we got at Platinum Peak. Um, and then if you want to listen to our podcast at some point, we've been doing that for about a year now. It's at Scaling Creator. So I know that's a lot. And Daniel, I can shoot you those over after this if you want.
Yeah, I'll add all of those to the show notes and to the YouTube description. But yeah, man, again, it was a total pleasure having this conversation with you. I really enjoyed the whole thing, and we could have talked for even more and going to other rabbit holes here and there. But truly fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it as well. That was good for my brain. Got me nice and stimulated for the rest of the day. So I appreciate it. Thank you again for having me.
thanks, you, man.